Hey everybody, welcome to episode 63 of the Is That Normal podcast. And today we are talking about division.
Yeah, but not long division.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, we are. We know that is a parenting challenge to get your kids through that, but that's not what we're going to help them out with today. We're going to talk about a different kind of division today, one that's probably even trickier than long division. What do we do when our kids disagree with us?
So, do your kids ever disagree with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would probably say often. How's that? Yeah, and a lot of times it revolves around the expectations of the household tasks that they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Whose turn it is to do the dishes. Education, like how much schoolwork should be done. Those kind of things, and then their perceived need for unlimited, unstructured free time. Like they just fight me tooth and nail. I should be able to play video games, 18 hours a day. That seems reasonable to them and not to me. But deeper than that, and really what we want to talk about today is, there's this underlying deeper problem of, as my kids get older, what if they disagree with me on fundamental things and truths that I hold and value dearly? Like what if they disagree with my faith and my worldview and the things we've raised them up to do and to believe?
Yeah.
Like when they start disagreeing with me on those things, what do I do? Which is a huge problem for parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's kind of one of the things we want to dive into just a little bit today and talk about, how to know when do we really engage and when do we hold our ground and when do maybe we take a step back and we kind of reference this episode as should I die on that hill? So
Right.
so that's what we kind of want to talk about today.
Yeah.
How do we approach those
Yeah.
things, especially when we get into the things that are foundational?
Right. Do we gear up for war or what do we do? And the funny thing for me, I was talking when my kids were young. Several of us used to joke that for my kids, rebelling was going to look like in modern country music and wearing cowboy boots, because that's what I rejected when I was a kid. So they're gonna flip the other way, and that's kind of a funny joke. But like I said, really the foundation of it for me is I want my number one goal is to raise my kids to love the Lord their God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to serve Him and to be obedient to Him because He's good, because it's true, because it's what's going to be best for them and everyone around them. And when they start pushing and questioning that, which all kids are going to at some point in some degree, it may not, some may not be as dramatic as others, but everyone's going to ask questions. And so when they start doing that, where do I navigate that line so I don't alienate them, that I continue the conversation, but that we hold to truth? And so, yeah.
And one of the things that we really have talked a lot about on this podcast is the fact that there's no single formula for how to raise your kids.
No.
Every parent is different. Every kid is different, and how those personalities interact. And there's just so many different variables, and you can do nearly everything right, and still at the end of the day run into some of these messy situations where maybe you feel like you've done everything you could to try to build a strong foundation, then all of a sudden maybe your child comes to you and says, I don't believe the things that you believe, or all of these things that you've been trying to instill in them, they feel that they have a different opinion on, and so that's where it gets really messy, and that's what we really want to talk about today is how do we handle that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the first things we have to realize is that these divisions, it's not always bad. God Himself, divides things. He divides between creation and creator. He divides between good and evil and heaven and earth. And so division isn't always bad. And what our kids usually are trying to do is figure out where that line is at, so they can figure out what side they should be on. And so we just have to learn how to navigate those things. And so today I hope that we can provide some principles to help our parents and adults do that for the young people in their lives.
Well, again, thank you for joining us today, and we're glad you're checking out the podcast. And if you haven't before, we encourage you to check out our previous episodes, and also check out our social media pages. We have tons of content that we're posting, in between our new episodes that kind of go along with and complement these podcasts, and lots of resources and things to check out. So if you haven't done that, be sure to do that as you check out the podcasts as well. And so one of the unique things about what we talk about here is that we're helping parents and adults navigate those transitional roles. And specifically, we're kind of talking about that adolescence, teenage years, and as they become young adults. And so, there's a lot of things that change during that time, and even the type of disagreements. You
Yes.
talked about what some, especially with maybe some of your younger kids, some of the things, the types of disagreements that happen in your household right now.
It's a big deal,
right?
Yeah.
But as our kids grow and start to become young adults, those things can take a shift to a much deeper type of disagreements, or things that they're trying to figure out in their life. It's more than just household rules, like you mentioned. It's what do I believe, and who am I going to be, and what am I going to build my life around? And so, you mentioned disagreement isn't necessarily always a bad thing. I love there was a campus pastor at CIYs that we've been to before for the leaders that's there. Then he always talks about how a lot of the growth and things happen within the tension.
Yes,
and
I love that. Yeah.
And I think for me, if I think back, some of those times where maybe I went way over here in left field, it took me going over there to realize, okay, I didn't. That's what I thought, or maybe I was experimenting and trying to figure things out, and it took that for me to really understand and get to a point where the things that were foundational really did begin to become my own and make sense to me.
Yeah. So, so as we dig into this, one of the first things we have to evaluate is the severity of the disagreement, and what the particular issue is that we're disagreeing about. I think a good first question to always ask, we should always start with ourselves and say, why does this bother me? Mm-hmm. So far, a child comes and says something or has done something, and we get this check in our heart, or our blood pressure goes up. Why am I getting bothered by this? And sometimes when we start asking that question, we really evaluate. We might realize part of it's our ego. Our kid's making me not look good. It's making me look like a bad parent. All those kind of things are involved. Sometimes it's just our feelings, like that they don't need me anymore. That they don't want my help and support like they did a couple of years ago, and that's hurt. And there's a mourning there, I think, for parents as you go through that, and so that can fuel that feeling of frustration. Maybe it's just my preferences, like. Is this a big enough deal to be something other than a preference? We have to evaluate that. And I think one of the hugest ones that we have to make sure we're careful of is to say, maybe what I'm frustrated about is that it revolves around my pre-selected picture of what I want them to be, or what I want their future to look like. Because we all do. We all have these dreams and hopes, and and as we nurture them, we've got this vision in our mind of what their future looks like. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is help them form themselves in God's image, not our image or our preference.
Yeah.
So we have to discern, is the issue here something that is more about my preference, my desire, my emotions, my preconceived notions, or is this truly a truth, a right and a wrong, we're heading to disaster kind of an issue? Because that brings me to, I think, the good second question. So after, why does this bother me, we should ask, why are they bringing up this issue?
Yeah.
So why is this an issue for them? And that could be a lot of things. It could just be strictly rebellion, just like saying, if you say yes, I'm saying no. If you say up, I'm saying down. And I've got one of those in my house who it's just naturally disagreeable, and that's and sometimes that's, and you just have to say no.
Yeah.
And so there's that. But maybe it's a move towards independence. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is them trying to exercise their growth. And I know one of the things my teenagers say all the time when we're dealing with these things is like, why don't you trust me? Why don't you trust me? And that's really a cue for us to say they're trying to figure out how to be an adult, how to be independent, and we need to figure out how to help them. So sometimes their idea of that may be flawed,
right?
But to identify that that's why they're doing this helps me to respond differently. So I always ask this of myself in this whole concept: is this a progress or a pitfall?
Yeah.
Like even though they may be going a direction, like you said, they may be going a direction I don't want them to go, is this going to be a track that's going to take them on progress, and I need to kind of let them maybe even have some consequences, but we know that we're going to get through this, or is this like we're about to crash and burn? And so I've got to really slow myself down and evaluate that, because if it's not a crash and burn, even if it's not exactly what I want, we might have to give them a little bit of space to try some things out while we still are involved in the conversation. So here's some questions that you can ask them to help discern some of this, I think. So one is why do you believe that? So if they come up to you and say, I think this, I want to do this, I don't believe that, I believe this, whatever. So why? Tell me, why do you believe that? And make them have to articulate that. Yeah. Another good question is, tell me what you're basing that idea or decision on. So did you go with this on your own? Like, did you pull this out of a hat? Like, did you read something? Are your friends telling you this? Have you put in some research time? Like why are you doing this? Like, what's your process? And then I like these two questions. They kind of go together. Is what do you particularly disagree with about my perspective? And I think you should start with the disagreement side, especially if you're kind of in conflict, to let them kind of get off their chest why they're frustrated with your old, outdated idea or whatever they're challenging. But then after they answer that and say, so, well, tell me what you do agree with about my perspective. And a lot of times they're willing to do that if you give them a platform to talk about it. So,
and it really does sometimes maybe force them to open up and take a deeper look at maybe where they're coming from and may even help them begin to make conclusions and right decisions on their own, because they actually have to examine and be able to defend where they're coming from.
Which is what we want. We want them to be able to grow up to figure out how to discern and make their own decisions about things. We don't want to, nor can we, make all their decisions for them their whole life. That's not what we want. So you have to give them space to learn that process. Yeah.
So how do we determine what the right view is of these types of things?
Yeah. So we have a conflict. They're having a disagreement. How do we figure out what really is the bottom line? The truth is that we all make every decision based on some standard. So everything I do, all of my actions are based on some standard. I may not have defined that standard. My kids particularly may not have defined that standard, but they are doing it based on a standard, whether they realize it or not. You can't get away with that. So everything, if I'm making a decision about how I spend money, if I'm making a decision about how I form relationships, it's all based on a standard that I'm or a goal that I'm trying to get to. And so for me, I have a set of filters that I try to use for myself and for my children, and they're really simple. They're not rocket science, but here it is. So what does God value? So as I make decisions, I need to determine what does God value, because I want my life to come in alignment with what God values, because I believe He sets the standard. What does God forbid? So things God says, don't do this. And then what does God instruct us to do? And so those three things, it's really simple. Does God value this? Does He forbid it? What is His instructions on this? And that's how I filter things.
And those are very simple. But what do we do then when maybe they disagree with that filter or the standard by which you're making those decisions by?
Right. And this is where, like you said at the beginning, Randall, that there's not a formula that's going to fix this. But I believe there's some principles that we can attempt to try. Now, part of this is I can try all I want, but I can't control their reaction back. And but as far as it is able with us, I want to continue the conversation with them, because I have an end goal in mind of trying to help them find truth. And so I want to keep that conversation open as long and as far as I'm able to. And so some of those things that I think we can do is, first of all, just that, remember the goal. If I'm fighting with someone, that means I'm trying to win. So my kid brings up a problem, and I'm fighting with them. It's because I want to be right and show them that they're wrong. But that's not really what I'm doing here. That's not my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal is to fight for them, because that means I'm trying to help them win. Yeah. Like in these conversations, my ultimate goal is not to be right. My ultimate goal is to help them find what is right. And like I said, I've got a child who tends to be disagreeable, and when it comes to like doing chores, like every day it is like I tell them to do their chore, and they say, "Why do I have to do that? Why do I have to do that?" And it's like, this is like, we have you actually signed a contract. We pull these things out and say, we talked about this. This is what we agreed to. But every day it's a fight. But I try not to take that personally, because my goal is not to just like overpower and make them do what they want because I want to get slave labor out of them. My goal is to teach them how to be responsible, how to manage their own schedule, how to accomplish tasks. And so my end game is because I want them to learn how to win. Yeah. And so I just keep at that, I just keep at that process. And so we've got to remember those goals so we don't get blow our tops, right? We also have to help them set boundaries. I love this. I read this somewhere this week, that we want to help them decide things, not to slide into things. Like they need to, we talk about this with my teenagers particularly a lot, about relationships. You need to have a preconceived plan, particularly in like romantic type relationships, of what your goals are, what you're going to do, what your boundaries are, what your stop points are. All of these, you need to decide that before you get there, because if you don't decide, you're just going to slide into, and next thing you know, you're deeper than you want to be in things that you don't want to be in. And so, and that goes with just about everything. That we want to help them decide, not slide. So a good question to have to ask, I think, is, what is the story you want to tell with your life? And so as we help our young people think about that, and we think about their life, like every decision we make is going to be a part of your story. And so do you want this to be a part of your story when you have to tell it before your spouse in the future, before me, before God, before a judge? What story do you want told? Is this part of what you want in your story? And so that leads to a second question is, so what is the wisest thing to do? And so those are some good questions. And then lastly, I think we also need to teach them where and how to find answers. And so always be a resource. Like I said, that's why we want to continue the conversation. Even if we're disagreeing, even if they're saying black and I'm saying white, I'm still here. I'm still a resource. I'm still willing to talk to you about this, as long as they're willing to talk. But be honest. You don't have to tell them that you agree with them. You can be honest, but try not to shut them out. And then sometimes we have to point them to other people who can be a voice in the situation, because sometimes they just can't hear it from us, or somebody else is poised differently to answer that. So,
and you kind of just answered this, but is it okay to tell them that you disagree with them?
Absolutely. So repentance is this like churchy word. That's a biblical concept that means that we turn from our ways and turn to God's standard, and that's ultimately the way we were created, the way we were designed, what God wills. And what's best for us and everyone around us, and what we want for our kids, is that they would turn from their ways and agree with God's ways, because he has set the right standard. And Jesus strongly preached that. Like when he went out and preached and he stood up, he literally said, we have this in the scriptures, repent, turn from your ways, because the kingdom of heaven is near. Like all y'all out there, stop doing what you're doing and turn back to God's ways, right? He was kind of fire and brimstone preacher if you look at what he said, but then you also have to look at what he did. He was still engaging people, meeting with people who were not the religiously upright people, going to sinners' houses, meeting with those kind of people, and showing them compassion and love. And so I think we need to hold that same model, that, man, we tell them, this is what's true. These are the consequences of not following this. But I love you, and I'm willing to go on this journey with you, as long as you're willing to go on with me. And so we got to hold those two sides in hand as we do that. I have read a story this week. Actually, it was Fuller Youth Institute shared this story about a family who, had a son who they had high hopes for him, as we all do, and raised him and hoped to go to college and get a good job and, get married and have a family, and, they have grandbabies and all those kind of things. But as it got time for him to go to college, he decided college wasn't for him, which was kind of a disappointment to them. And so they said, "What are you going to do?" And he said, "Well, I'm thinking about doing microbrewing, like craft beers." And they're like, "We're Baptists. Like, how's that going to work out?" Right? And so they're having all this contention with him. And the next thing you know, he brings home this girl who's an atheist, and he starts saying, "Yeah, I've been hanging out with her and talking to her, and I'm not sure I quite believe in God anymore either." And so it's like boom, 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 like all these things are happening, blowing up, and next thing you know, him and his girlfriend, they get an apartment, they move in together. And so there's all this turmoil going on in this family. We're seeking godly counsel from people in their church, and they got a wide variety of ideas, everything from like cut them off, throw them out, don't talk to them again until they get right. To like what's wrong with what they're doing. So the gamut of advice, but what they finally decided on is that they were not going to compromise. They were going to make sure they knew where their stance was and all the decisions they're making, but they're going to continue to be available and keep that relationship open. And and it's not easy. It's not a quick fix. And and as of the writing of the story, things had still not turned all the way around. But they did share that girlfriend at one point came to the parents and just broke down crying and saying, you don't agree with almost anything I believe. I know that what your son and I are doing is unpleasing to you. I know there's a lot of problems here, and yet you still are so nice to me. Why do you do that? And they say, because Christ was good to me. and He's
Yeah.
called me to be good to others, even if I disagree with them. And so it's just that tension of, you know, and there's no one way to fix this, but we've got to keep holding to truth and loving people with the love that God showed us when we didn't agree with Him. And so, yeah.
And you know, a lot of what we're talking about is hard, and it can be really discouraging at times. So what words of encouragement would you give to parents and families?
Yeah, so several things. One, don't give up. As long as God is there, there's hope, right? So with God, there's always hope. So don't give up, even if things look the bleakest. Secondly, find ways to stay relationally connected. It's worth it. And you know, and unfortunately, sometimes it may be a situation where, you know, you're willing, but they're not. And you know, we have that story of the prodigal son, you know, and the father just waited until that son came to his senses and came back and sought reconciliation. And so that sometimes that's the best that we can do is to sit and wait, knowing that we're willing to talk to them about reconciliation if they come back. And lastly, seek God. You know, pray, read the Bible, cry, listen to God, and just seek His strength. You know, Robert Morgan, who was a pastor, he's still teaching pastor at his church, but has written a lot of books. And he wrote a great little compilation called Moments for Families with Prodigals. And I'd really recommend it. We'll put a link in our notes for you to get it. It's just a collection of a lot of little short page or two, little thoughts and scriptures and stories of how we sort through all these kind of things. And one of those, he shares a story about a missionary who realizes that the untruths of our culture are like poisonous gas. And nothing that we can do can get rid of poisonous gas. It's only the breath of God's Spirit that can fix that. And so we have to rest in that, as well as trust that God is with us in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up today, our two takeaways. The first is to evaluate your disagreements and make a plan of action and ask some of those good questions of yourself and your child, because as you said, that there's two sides to that. So some of the first questions may need to be, you know, why does that bother me so much, and make sure, you know, where our motivations are, but then ask some of those questions of them and maybe get a little bit of insight into maybe what may be going on under the surface and
their decision making process.
Absolutely. And the next thing is just to join us in 2 weeks for our next podcast, and in the meantime, join our streams of connection and watch for our supplemental content that we'll be posting on our Facebook page, Instagram, our YouTube page. We'll have, you know, clips and resources in between there, so be sure to be checking that stuff out.
Yep.
All right.
Be abnormal.